Speaking of pilgrimages, there's a flyer on the back table. Maybe you have found it. It really talks about two pilgrimages, one to Iona, next about a year away, next September, the 20th through the 29th, 2019. Linda McFadden is right there. Stand up, Linda, please. And I will be co-leading that, and Philip Weed, stand up. He helps to coordinate the whole deal. And so that pilgrimage is next September. All the information is right here. And then also they are leading a pilgrimage out to the Pueblo peoples, which is next June 1 through 11. And information about both pilgrimages are on this sheet. So hope you will check it out. And there's a deadline for registering to get the break. What is it?
October 31st.
October 31st?
Yeah.
If you register before then for?
$200 less.
Less. Okay. All right. Thanks, Philip. So I've been making the case that the religions of monotheism have not served us really well in the last few centuries anyway. In the break, I was talking to several people and found myself making the comment that I think all religions have a short lifespan, a short shelf space. Because what happens is we have these powerful experiences, we create names, we create rituals, we create text, and they serve a good purpose for a while, but what happens very soon is all of those original experiences then begin to be something to believe in. And once the original experience changes to something that you believe in, meaning you have to believe this, we pass it on, and so on, the original experience evaporates. So it's my observation, and probably my bias, that all religions have a short lifespan, or needs to have a short lifespan. So I've been making the case that that monotheism, as we have known it, has in fact, I'm making the case now that it has died, and that the religions and institutions and cultures shaped by that myth and image are suffering from various stages of grief. I don't have time to go into all of that, but let me say quickly. I came to this awareness out of my own personal experience that as a minister for a lot of years, some, I don't know, 25 more, I slowly had this awareness that something was not quite right. It took me a long time to realize that I was really grieving. I was depressed, but I was grieving because all that I had been taught as a child and young adult, that myth, that way of making meaning out of my world, out of my life, and people that I was in contact with, no longer worked. It helped me for a while, but then something happened. It was no longer even capable of helping me make meaning out of a much more complicated and complex world than I had known as a kid. And so I did not know this, but after a lot of analysis and searching and so on, I discovered that I had been grieving a long time, and that I had gone through the predictable stages of grief: shock, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and slowly moved towards some resolution. But then, of course, all those stages of grief, you revisit them from time to time, as we all know, with the griefs that we have to work through. And so I made the case in this this very good book that we keep talking about, that I think we are caught in various stages of grief over the death of a myth that no longer works. problem is that we're still largely in denial that it has died. And unconscious grief manifests in all kinds of pathologies, and all kinds of divisions, and all kinds of ways that aren't very healthy. So I'm making the case that we need to acknowledge that the myth has died, and we need to bring it to a good funeral. What I see myself in recent time, maybe in the last few years anyway, as a religious eulogizer. Because I'm standing by the graveside and I'm acknowledging, probably not as much as I need to, I'm acknowledging all the good things that monotheism has done, and all the people it has inspired, and all the compassion that it has generated. And so I'm acknowledging that. It's part of the eulogy. But I'm also acknowledging that part of the myth and the God image that no longer works, it has died. And needs to be buried, so that we then can grieve consciously and allow for something new. And I'm doing this because I believe in resurrection. I believe that there is a dynamic at the heart of the universe where things have a life, it dies, and something new springs up. I don't anymore believe in the resurrection, that Jesus rose literally from the dead, but I do believe in resurrection. I think to believe in the resurrection, the early church had to somehow authenticate that this man, their guy, was somehow more divine than any other prophet. But I believe in resurrection, that new things happen when we acknowledge death. So I don't think it's going to be helpful for us to operate out of resuscitation or revivals or reformation. We've been trying that now for how many years? Many, many years. We have to acknowledge that a lot of the God image and the myth of monotheism has died. And that's what I've been making the case for. And there's a lot more about, the grieving process and how that manifests in the divisions and the angst and the despair that we're all experiencing at some level. And so that's my quick conclusion to the first talk. But I want to get on to the second. Like, so what? Okay, so if we don't have a myth that no longer works well, then what are the possibilities? And so, exactly 40 years ago, was surprising to me, I looked it up. Exactly 40 years ago, the psychologist M. Scott Peck wrote a best-selling book called The Road Less Traveled. It was subtitled A New Psychology of Love, Traditional Values, and Spiritual Growth. Many of you remember that very good book. Can it be 40 years? It's been 40 years since that book was published. So, and you probably remember even the first sentence. Who remembers the first sentence? Life is difficult. Yeah, that's not catching phrase. Life is difficult. It's a very good book. And I flipped through it again in the past week, and it still is a very good book. You will also remember that his title was an allusion to a poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, penned in 1915. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So cueing off of Frost, The Road Not Taken, and Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, I want to frame this second talk around the metaphor, the religious road or path, less traveled, the religious road or path less traveled, to engage our imagination about the nature of such a path and where it might lead, and even more importantly, what difference it might make. So once again, I must appeal to my Baptist upbringing. The 11th commandment was something like, you should always practice what you preach. You probably heard that, even if you weren't Baptist. You should practice what you preach. Well, it was and is a worthy injunction. However, I do not believe we are limited to preach, teach, or share only that which we perfectly practice. If that were so, most sermons would be much shorter, and you could get to the restaurant before the crowds. The unemployment rate in Washington, D.C. would skyrocket. Fox News would go off the air, and that would be a very good thing. And to be honest, these talks would have been much shorter. I would have reined in some of my Irish love of words. But rather than being limited to preach or teach or speak or share, only that which we perfectly practice, I believe our deeper call is to preach, teach, speak to the limit of our vision. While remembering this fundamental, see, I am a fundamentalist, while remembering this fundamental psychological spiritual fact, I am a microcosm of what is wrong with the world, and I am a microcosm of what is right with the world. I'm a microcosm of what is wrong with the world every day in every way, and I'm a microcosm of what is right with the world every day in every way. So again, reactivating my fundamentalist tendencies, that is the only theology and psychology we need, and ethics too. If, when we are able to live into that attitude, individually and collectively, in all of our relationships, our divisions will cease, scapegoating will be no more, and the long hoped for peace that passes understanding will happen. Yet, while we're waiting for that to happen on a collective global level, which might take a year or two, we are enjoined to practice that individually. So, with that attitude, then, I'm free to speak to the limit of my vision, realizing I don't practice perfectly what I preach, but I do have a vision. And I am freshly aware that and I suggest each of us, is a microcosm. A whole world, a microcosm of what is wrong with the world and what is right with the world. Is Lindsey Graham here? Lindsey, I'll tell you what, the Senate hearing was a wonderful laboratory of the process of psychological projection. Perfect. It was perfect. You know, the idea that we see in other people the very things that we have difficulty with. And then Lindsey, bless his heart, to use that phrase, bless his heart, in his tyrannical rage, actually claiming those other people on the other side of the aisle wanted power. Lindsey, you have never met a power he didn't grasp. But he has that lovely smile that you kind of, fall in love with him again, kind of. Sometimes I imagine that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there's a big storage unit. And in that storage unit are just hundreds and thousands of tethers. Because so many of our politicians have lost their tether to their integrity. And we know that too. Don't we lose our tether to our integrity? But that whole scene was an awful, wonderfully awful example of psychological projection. We'll be reliving that for a long, long time. Longer than I would expect. So, peering down the religious path less traveled and squinting, I imagine a religious path that will be marked by what I have grown to name as a grounded, embodied mysticism. That's where I would hope we go, with a grounded, embodied mysticism, and I'd like to unfold some of that. So, exercising my own imagination, looking back from a place far down the evolutionary road, I think, I hope, that we will see the religions of the past, all of them, including our present ones, as necessary stages along a twisting labyrinthine path. Our species will eventually embrace the psychological conclusion that it is the human imagination that creates God images and religions. We've created it, drawing from a storehouse of accumulated wisdom that we didn't create. So once again, there is this accumulation of wisdom, which we call the collective unconscious psychologically. And from that storehouse, which we did not create, we create religions and God images and names and so on. We will come to realize that we are, this is my hope, we'll say this 3 times. We will come to realize that we are, in fact, what we saw of ourselves in projected form in external deities and devils. We will come to realize, eventually, that we are, in fact, what we saw of ourselves in projected form in external deities and devils. No, we will not see ourselves as little gods or devils, nor as a super race which grew out of the Enlightenment. Rather, we will accept our full humanity, through whom both godly and demonic powers are manifest. Our species will come to recognize and own both our gore and our glory. We're what's right with the world, we also what's wrong with the world. We will come to recognize that both gore and glory, which were projected necessarily onto external deities and devils, we will conclude that in the wisdom of psyche it was necessary to see our creative and destructive capacities in projected form until we could own and manifest both responsibly. That's going to take a while. It takes a long time for us to do that individually. How far along are we? Well, maybe 30% for me. I got 70% to go. But I think it's our attitude. If we can imagine that what we imagine our deities and devils to be are in fact the creative and destructive forces, powers at work in our own being. If we can own that, live into that, and live that responsibly, then I think a whole new pathway to wholeness could open up. So, as I scan the distant religious horizon, my dream is for a new religious attitude. I think we will not have another fully developed religion as we have known in the past. That age is over. I'm not hoping for a new religion, but I am hoping for a new religious attitude. And that attitude will have some particular kinds of characteristics. Again, growing out of primarily depth psychology, which I'm partial to, of course. So the image which has caught my imagination in recent time is a grounded, embodied mysticism. And I'd like to talk about what that might mean. Now, the term mystic is one that has been thrown around and for a long time, and it has received bad press in some areas. C.G. Jung was criticized for being a mystic, and that meant, and those who were his critics, that he was sort of airy, woolly-minded, not grounded. The way I'm using mystic here is that we have access to these great mysteries in the universe that we have named God, goddesses, wisdom, and so on. We have access to that, and it's not mediated by either preacher, pastor, pope, prophet. We have a direct experience of the holy, of the sacred. It's not dependent. It's not dependent on the Catholic Church to mediate that, or the pope, or the preacher, or the teacher. We have these direct experiences really all the time, night and day. So I'm using mystic in that sense. So I think this grounded, embodied mysticism is a necessary corrective or compensation for those short-sighted, fearful perspectives of mystics over the ages that they're not really in touch. I failed to say that I think probably the most important for religious folks insight of Jung, we all have our favorites, of course. I think his most important insight, far-reaching insight, was what I call the recalling of the deities and devils to their psychogenetic origins and the task of dealing with those responsibly within. So what he did in a moment of, I think, pure genius, he imagined that those powers that we attribute to devils and deities, which we thought were out there, are really, they have their origin in the human psyche. So the recalling of the deities and devils to the human psyche and the responsibility of dealing with those powers there. So through the lens of a grounded mysticism, we look to life itself for evidences of the same. Life itself is a sacred text we must learn to read. Divinity comes to us disguised as our life. We look to nature herself in her 13.8 billion years of cosmic unfolding and the 4.5 billion earthly experiment. A grounded, embodied mysticism sees human nature as an organic extension of nature herself. We're neither separate from her nor superior to nature. Our bodies made up of the stuff of the universe, and the human psyche as the recorder of nature's story, her human voice, and her co-creator of the future with the precious gift and burden of consciousness. So in the monotheistic tradition, nature has gotten a bad rap because we humans are supposed to be superior to nature, to use nature. What is the word? To dominate, and there's another word too. Dominion. Have dominion over here. We've done pretty well there. We've followed that injunction pretty well. Have dominion. We have to change that orientation and to see ourselves, we are nature naturing. We're not above nature. We are nature naturing. And in the wisdom of nature herself, we have been tasked with being the recorder of nature, her human voice, and her co-creator of the future. That is the power of consciousness. And so therefore, in this new path that is opening up, and what I'm imagining is this path, this road, you know, two paths diverge, and one goes off. Let's see if I do right or left, doesn't matter. It probably does matter. One path is a well-traveled path, and we know that path. But there's this other path that is barely marked. And in fact, that new path, that new road has not even been constructed. We will construct that path as we're willing to walk it and construct it as we go. So if you need security and safety and sameness, if you need a map that's well marked, you probably don't want to go down this path that I'm imagining. So it's for those who are willing to risk, to go into a dark kind of wood, into a dark future, with a certain kind of attitude. So, in this new myth, we look for the sacred in the everywhere, and in the everyday, and in the every moment. We look for the sacred in the body, and in bodily symptoms, and between bodies, in those wonderful, complex experiences called relationships. And yes, even in sexual relationships. Sex has gotten a really bad rap in monotheism. A really bad rap. Just think about our own Christian story. How the body has been devalued, made suspect. We even had to make Mary a virgin to avoid all that sexy stuff. And then we, rather than really experiencing Jesus as a real, live human person, the early church then had to quickly make him into God, put him up there somewhere, at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, cross him, what's his first name? Dominic crossed him when he was here or somewhere. I heard him somewhere, maybe in Flat Rock. I don't know where I heard him. But he was saying, okay, so Jesus ascended into heaven and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. So that would mean then that God is to Jesus' left. So, he says, if you want to find God, look to Jesus and keep going left. I kind of like that. So we look for the sacred within matter itself, and within all that does matter. So when I employ the word God, which is rare now, gets more and more difficult, by that I mean this: the animating powers and presences at the heart of all matter, and at the heart of all that does matter. That's my, quote, definition of God. The animating, it's a good psychological word, the enlivening, the animating presence and presences and powers, plural. Please stop that. The animating powers and presences at the heart of all matter and at the heart of all that does matter. I think it's a good exercise for all of us to really try to, in one sentence, say what we mean when we say God. It's a good exercise. So that's mine. It's my personal version of Jung's profound and provocative definition of God, which came late in his life. He was asked, you know, what is when you say God, your definition of God? This is what he said after all his writing and descent into the unconscious, his own and others. God is the name by which I designate all those things which cross my willful path, all those things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse. God is the name by which I designate all those things which cross my willful path, which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse. What a powerful statement of faith. Wisdom within the universe, in that first email, that she sent me last week, talked about that. That if we want one word for God, use life. Because that's what God is. It's that those mysterious forces and presences that we did not create, we can't control nor command. God is life. Life is God. It's as simple and complex as that. So a grounded mysticism recognizes the interconnected and interrelated web of life which our sciences continue to validate, in which our fearful religions and politics continue to resist and frustrate. A grounded mysticism, a grounded embodied mysticism, confirms that all of us matter or none of us matter. We're all going to get to heaven or none of us are. We all matter. A grounded embodied mysticism preserves and amplifies what has been the best of religion so far, that is, the provision of rituals for significant life stages and passages, concern for the least and the last, for the ill, for the outcast, for the outsider. In other words, a grounded embodied mysticism elevates compassion as the highest human virtue. So I once heard James Finley, who is a religious scholar. Some of you have heard him speak and read his work. I heard him once talk about the mystical tradition which has helped me ground very practically what I'm imagining and hoping may be the grounded embodied mysticism of the future, this new path that's opening up. A mystical attitude toward all of life might be promoted by approaching all people and all things with the unspoken mantra, while I am not you, neither am I other than you. While I am not you, neither am I other than you. Now, in my imagination, the mystery at the heart of the universe, which we're calling wisdom today, approaches us and says, while I'm not you, neither am I other than you. And then, as we approach each other, what would it be like if we maintained that attitude? While I'm not you, neither am I other than you. Can you see that on the two sides of the Senate hearing? How that would change, hopefully. While I'm not you, neither am I other than you. And then we leave our human species and we go out to the trees and to the flowers and to the seas. And we say, while I'm not you, neither am I other than you. And to our pets, our animals, while I'm not you, neither am I other than you. I think a good spiritual discipline for all of us that would change our relationship to the environment overnight if all of us took on the discipline every day, tell something of the natural world how much you love them. Try it. Sometimes we can go days without even touching the earth, soil. We're on carpet, asphalt, and so on. We can go days without even touching the earth. So every day finds some natural being in the natural world. Just tell that subject, but that's what it is. We treat nature as objects for our use. We have to change that. They're subjects to be related to because we are part of what we call the natural world. Not different from. The only difference that we think how we differ is that we do have the capacity to reflect on our nature and on nature itself. And that is then the gift of consciousness. The poet Mary Oliver captures that same mystical perspective of Finley. Well, I'm not you, neither am I other than you, where she says, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and sisterhood. Both perspectives from Finley and Mary Oliver have proven to be both a blessing and a curse for me as I've lived into this. A blessing to approach all the lovely things and people with such an intimate awareness. That's easy, isn't it? We can approach, I could probably do that with everybody in this room. You know, well, I'm not you, neither am I other than you. But we move out of this kind of setting, and it's a little more difficult. It's a curse to bring the same awareness to those persons and things I would rather not embrace. The gift and burden of consciousness, and perhaps the birthplace and real meaning of compassion. So I've been working with Brother Trump. He's been working with me for 2 years now, almost. Been working with all of us. So how do I take this that I'm teaching to say, approach all people, all things, while I'm not you, neither am I other than you. How do we deal with that? After I've already indicated that I think his primary pathologies are narcissism, paranoia, and scapegoating. I think that's the trinity of his illness. And that mirrors what I'm proposing is generated by our holding on to monotheistic religions that promote that sort of thing. If you are the chosen race, you are narcissistic. And you're going to suspect people who aren't in the tribe, and you're going to find somewhere to put your dark stuff, scapegoating. Well, it's easy for me to see, as an analyst, how that is not only Trump's problem, he's just a symptom of what has constellated, that has been building up for a long, long time, in our refusal to look at our own shadow. I'm not going to go as far as to say that Trump is a gift to us. Can't go there. But all of this despair and dis-ease and distress that we're experiencing could be purposeful if we can find a way to get underneath it, and also to own that we are the problem that we're seeing collectively. Jung says it this way: what we refuse to face inside meets us from the outside as fate. That'll keep you awake at night. Keeps me awake at night. What we refuse to face inside meets us from the outside as fate. I am of the persuasion that we have constellated our fate as Western democracy. So, Trump is a symptom. Now, in working with this, I've had to own, and I can say it almost out loud now. No, I can say it out loud. I can almost believe it. That Donald Trump is my brother. And he's a brother that is ill. And we need to intervene. If we had a family of 6 people, and somebody was manifesting the meanness, the cruelty, the mocking that he does, we would have to intervene with that family member and get some help. So I can clearly say that we need to get him out of office because he's a danger to, I think, the world. And I can say at the same time, while I'm not you, Donald, neither am I other than you, because I know that I have dark shadows myself. I know, like you, I am what's wrong with the world, and I'm also what's right with the world. So someone was asking me in the break, how do we deal with our despair these days? And how do we make claims like I just said, that I think he's ill and he needs to be removed from office. Well, I think it's the attitude with which you do that intervention. If you do it self-righteously and with anger and with revenge, then that doesn't work. So, it's the attitude with which we intervene with people, with our brothers and sisters who are not well. Now, in working with that, I did a whole thing about the Trump nightmare and worked that whole thing as a dream. And what I came out with was, while I don't like Trump and the swampy cabinet anymore, I hate him less. And I think that's, on my part, transformation. Now I'll keep working with him. The Buddhists have a way of saying you don't have to move from hate to loving kindness in one big leap. But you can move toward the middle where you are less hateful. So, these are very, very difficult days for us and difficult times. All of us are caught up in it. It's really easy to choose sides and to see the problems in the other person. I don't know of any way through it other than what I've said, that we have to come to terms with our own makeup and really be convinced that I am the microcosm of what's wrong with the world, I'm a microcosm of what's right with the world, and to live as if that's true, which I think is faith. To live as if it's true. Now, I can go on and on and on and on, and I love to go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop and entertain some conversation and discussion, please.